November 1942, Tunisia, North Africa. The German tank commander squinted through his periscope at the bizarre contraption the American soldier was pointing at his Panzer IV. It looked like a plumber's pipe with a crude shoulder rest, nothing more than scrap metal welded together by some desperate mechanic. His crew laughed when he described the primitive weapon over the radio. These Americans, they joked, were so poorly equipped they were bringing garden tools to a tank fight. The laughter stopped abruptly when a rocket-propelled grenade punched through their armour plating like it was made of cardboard. What the Germans had just witnessed was their first encounter with a weapon that would fundamentally change the nature of warfare itself. A device so simple that American soldiers nicknamed it after a comedian's musical instrument, yet so revolutionary that it would inspire Nazi engineers to create their own superior version. The bazooka had arrived on the battlefield, and with it came the dawn of modern infantry anti-tank warfare. But this story begins long before that fateful day in the North African desert. The tale of the bazooka is one of desperate innovation, bureaucratic fumbling, brilliant engineering, and the peculiar way that military technology evolves through a combination of genius and pure accident. It's the story of how a weapon dismissed as a joke became one of the 4 tools of victory that won World War II, according to none other than Dwight Eisenhower himself. The journey starts in the most unlikely of places, with a radio comedian named Bob Burns, who played a crude horn made from gas pipes and a whiskey funnel. Burns called his makeshift instrument a bazooka, after the Dutch word bazoo, meaning trumpet. Little did he know that his silly musical contraption would lend its name to one of the most significant military innovations of the 20th century. The connection seemed absurd at the time, but when Army personnel first laid eyes on the prototype rocket launcher at Aberdeen Proving Grounds in 1942, someone remarked that it looked exactly like Bob Burns' bazooka. The name stuck, and military history was made with a comedian's prop as its inspiration. The real genesis of this revolutionary weapon lay in the brilliant minds of 2 Army ordnance innovators who were grappling with an increasingly urgent problem. Captain Leslie Skinner and Lieutenant Edward Ohl faced a tactical nightmare that was becoming all too common on battlefields across Europe and North Africa. German armour was growing thicker, more sophisticated, and more deadly with each passing month. The Wehrmacht's tanks were rolling across continents with seeming impunity, and American infantry had no reliable method to stop them. Traditional anti-tank guns were too heavy for foot soldiers to maneuver effectively, and existing weapons simply couldn't penetrate the armour of modern German tanks. Skinner and Ohl had been experimenting with shaped charge grenades that pack tremendous armour-piercing punch through the hollow charge principle. These grenades could theoretically penetrate tank armour, but they presented an obvious problem. They were far too heavy for soldiers to throw with any accuracy or range, making them practically useless in combat situations. A soldier would need to get within arm's reach of an enemy tank to deploy the weapon effectively, which was essentially a suicide mission. The breakthrough came through what can only be described as inspired improvisation. One day, Lieutenant Ohl was walking through a scrap pile at their testing facility when he spotted a discarded steel tube. Something clicked in his mind as he stared at that mundane piece of metal. What if they could launch their shaped charge grenades through a tube instead of throwing them? The concept was elegantly simple. Add a rocket motor to the grenade, create a smoothbore launch tube, and suddenly infantry soldiers would have a weapon specifically designed to penetrate armour from a safe distance. The development process moved with remarkable speed once the basic concept was established. The team created a shoulder-fired rocket launcher consisting of a steel tube approximately 5 feet long, open at both ends, equipped with a hand grip rest, triggered grip, shoulder mechanism, and basic sighting system. The weapon was officially designated the M9A1 rocket launcher, but everyone involved knew it would forever be remembered by its more colourful nickname. For the first time in military history, an individual foot soldier possessed a weapon specifically engineered to destroy tanks. The psychological impact of this development cannot be overstated. Throughout human warfare, infantry had always been vulnerable to cavalry, then to armoured vehicles, and finally to tanks. The bazooka represented a fundamental shift in the balance of power between foot soldiers and mechanised forces. No longer would infantry cower helplessly as enemy armour rolled through their positions. The weapon incorporated the hollow charge anti-tank principle that had been perfected through years of research into shaped explosive charges. When the rocket struck its target, the hollow charge would create a focused explosion that could punch through armour plating with devastating effectiveness. The physics were elegant and brutal in their simplicity. The shape charge would create a high-velocity jet of molten metal that could penetrate even the thickest armour then in service. However, the path from prototype to battlefield deployment revealed the chaotic reality of wartime weapon development. In November 1942, during Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa, early production versions of the M1 launcher and M6 rocket were hastily supplied to American invasion forces. The timing could not have been worse for a proper introduction of revolutionary military technology. General Dwight Eisenhower received a shocking revelation on the night before the landings. None of his troops had received any instruction in the use of the bazooka. Here was a weapon that could potentially change the course of ground warfare, and the soldiers who were supposed to wield it had no idea how it functioned, what its capabilities were, or how to employ it effectively in combat situations. The initial battlefield performance was nothing short of disastrous. Military personnel lacked basic information about how to operate the weapon effectively. Even more problematic, the early M6 rocket was highly unreliable, suffering from manufacturing defects and design flaws that rendered it nearly useless in actual combat conditions. The combination of untrained operators and defective ammunition created a perfect storm of battlefield ineffectiveness. The results spoke for themselves with brutal clarity. By May 1943, no confirmed reports had been received of the bazooka actually stopping an enemy tank in combat. The weapon that was supposed to revolutionize infantry anti-tank warfare had failed its first major test. A United States general visiting the Tunisian front in 1943, after combat operations had concluded, conducted an informal survey of frontline soldiers. He could not find a single soldier who could report that the bazooka had actually stopped an enemy tank during the North African campaign. The weapon's performance problems extended beyond simple reliability issues. Environmental factors plagued the bazooka's electrical firing system in North African conditions. Heat and humidity caused frequent short circuits and misfires, leaving soldiers with a useless tube when they needed a functioning weapon most desperately. The bazooka also produced significant backblast from the firing rocket that streamed out of the rear end of the tube, creating serious safety hazards for operators and anyone standing behind the weapon. The rocket-propelled rounds left obvious smoke trails that immediately revealed the shooter's position to enemy forces, making bazooka teams prime targets for retaliation. Under ideal conditions, the weapon could engage targets up to 300 yards away, but battlefield realities forced most engagements to occur at ranges under 30 yards. This close-range requirement led to an alarmingly high mortality rate among bazooka gunners, who often had to move dangerously close to their targets to ensure effective hits. German forces encountered these early problematic bazookas during the North African campaign and initially dismissed them as crude, ineffective weapons that posed little threat to their superior armoured vehicles. Their assessment seemed entirely justified based on the weapon's dismal combat performance during its first deployment. Yet beneath the surface of this apparent failure, German military intelligence was conducting a far more sophisticated analysis. While frontline troops laughed at the primitive American weapon, Wehrmacht engineers in Berlin were studying captured bazookas with the methodical precision that characterized German technical innovation. What they discovered would soon transform the mockery into genuine concern, then into outright fear. The first captured bazookas arrived at German testing facilities in late 1942, transported from North African battlefields, along with other American equipment that had fallen into enemy hands. Some examples had been seized from Soviet forces who had received quantities under the Lend-Lease program. while others were collected during the chaotic early days of Operation Torch, when American forces were still learning to use their new weapons effectively. German ordnance experts immediately recognized the revolutionary potential hidden beneath the bazooka's crude exterior appearance. The basic concept was sound, even brilliant in its simplicity. A shoulder-fired rocket launcher that could give individual infantry soldiers the capability to destroy tanks represented a fundamental shift in battlefield dynamics that German tacticians understood better than most. Their own forces had experienced the devastating effectiveness of anti-tank weapons during the brutal fighting on the Eastern Front, where Soviet forces had developed increasingly sophisticated methods of destroying German armour. The captured bazookas were promptly shipped back to Germany for comprehensive technical analysis. German engineers dismantled the weapons completely, studying every component from the steel launch tube to the rocket's shaped charge warhead. They analysed the electrical firing system, examined the rocket motor design, and tested the penetration capabilities of the hollow charge explosive. What they found was a weapon concept with enormous potential that had been poorly executed in its initial American implementation. With characteristic German efficiency and attention to detail, the engineers began developing their own improved version of the American design. They identified the bazooka's fundamental weaknesses and engineering and set about correcting them through superior manufacturing techniques. The result would become one of the most feared infantry weapons of World War II, earning a nickname that struck terror into the hearts of Allied tank crews across Europe. The German version was designated the Raketenpanzerbüchse 54, literally meaning Rocket Anti-Armor Rifle Model 54, though it would become universally known by its more evocative nickname, Panzerschreck, or Tank's Bane name. Nice. The perfectly captured the weapon's intended psychological and tactical impact. This was not merely an anti-tank weapon. It was a device specifically engineered to terrorize armored vehicles and their crews. German engineers made several crucial improvements over the American original that dramatically enhanced the weapon's effectiveness. Most significantly, they increased the diameter of the rocket from 60mm to 88mm, the same caliber as Germany's legendary anti-aircraft and anti-tank guns. This larger warhead carried significantly more explosive material and could penetrate much thicker armour than the American version. The Panzerschreck's rocket could penetrate 210mm of armour plating, thicker than the protective armour of any Allied tank then in service. This penetration capability meant that no Allied armoured vehicle was safe from the weapon, regardless of how heavily protected it might appear. Even the mighty Soviet IS-3 heavy tank with its massive armour plating could be defeated by a well-placed Panzerschreck round. However, the German improvements came with significant operational drawbacks that revealed the weapon's awesome power. Unlike American bazooka rockets, which were designed to burn out their fuel before leaving the launch tube, the Panzerschreck rockets continued burning for approximately 2 meters after exiting the weapon. This created an enormous blast of flame and heat that could seriously injure or kill the weapon's operator if proper precautions were not taken. German forces developed elaborate protective equipment to shield Panzerschreck operators from their own weapon's back blast. Crews received protective gloves, special ponchos and gas masks to protect them from the intense heat and toxic fumes generated during firing. The weapon earned an unofficial nickname among German troops, Offenrohr, meaning stovepipe, a reference to both its tubular appearance and the tremendous heat it generated when fired. The Panzerschreck's firing signature was even more dramatic than the original bazookas. The weapon produced copious amounts of smoke both in front of and behind the firing position, creating a massive cloud that instantly revealed the location of the anti-tank team. This meant that Panzerschreck crews had to fire and immediately relocate to avoid deadly retaliation from enemy forces, who could easily spot their position. Despite these operational challenges, the Panzerschreck proved devastatingly effective in combat situations. German anti-tank teams armed with the weapon began achieving remarkable success rates against Allied armour, fundamentally changing the tactical balance on European battlefields. Tank crews who had previously felt relatively secure behind their armour plating now faced the constant threat of infantry portable weapons that could destroy their vehicles from considerable distances. The psychological impact on Allied forces was profound and immediate. Tank commanders found themselves having to completely revise their tactical approaches when operating in areas where Panzerschreck teams might be present. The weapon's long range meant that anti-tank crews could engage targets from positions that were previously considered safe, forcing Allied armour to operate with unprecedented caution. Meanwhile, American forces were beginning to learn from their initial failures with the bazooka through hard-won battlefield experience. The disastrous performance in North Africa had prompted urgent improvements to both the weapon itself and the training programs for soldiers who would operate it. By 1943, upgraded versions of the bazooka were reaching frontline units along with comprehensive instruction on proper employment techniques. The improved M1A1 bazooka featured a more reliable rocket design and enhanced electrical firing system that reduced the misfires and malfunctions that had plagued the original version. More importantly, American soldiers finally received proper training on how to use the weapon effectively, learning techniques for target selection, range estimation, and tactical employment that maximized their chances of success while minimizing their exposure to enemy retaliation. The transformation in the bazooka's battlefield effectiveness became apparent during the Allied invasion of Sicily in July 1943. American forces equipped with the improved M1A1 bazookas and the more reliable M6A1 rockets began achieving genuine success against German armour for the first time since the weapon's introduction. During those sweltering summer days in Sicily, American bazookamen finally tasted victory against German steel. The M1A1 accounted for 4 medium Panzer IV tanks during the campaign, proving that proper training and reliable ammunition could transform a laughingstock into a legitimate threat. But the most remarkable achievement occurred on the narrow cobblestone streets of Biscari, where an American soldier accomplished something that seemed impossible just months earlier. The massive Tiger I tank rumbled through the town like a mechanical predator, its 60 tons of armour and firepower seemingly invincible against conventional infantry weapons. The Tiger represented everything terrifying about German engineering excellence. Its thick, sloped armour could deflect most anti-tank rounds, and its deadly 88mm gun could destroy Allied tanks from distances that rendered return fire ineffective. To most infantry soldiers, encountering a Tiger meant death or retreat. There were no other options. But one American soldier saw opportunity where others saw certain doom. The Tiger's driver peered through a narrow vision slit that could be adjusted by moving 2 armoured shields. This seemingly insignificant design feature represented the tank's single A-gap point of vulnerability, barely wider than a man's fist. The American himself with soldier positioned his bazooka and waited for the perfect moment. When it came, he fired a single rocket that threaded through that narrow opening with precision that defied probability. The shape-charged warhead detonated inside the Tiger's fighting compartment with devastating results. The crew was killed instantly, and the supposedly invincible tank became a burning monument to American ingenuity and exceptional marksmanship. News of the Tiger kill spread rapidly through Allied forces, transforming the bazooka's reputation overnight from failure to giant killer. If a foot soldier could destroy Nazi Germany's most feared tank with a shoulder-fired weapon, anything was possible. The success in Sicily marked a turning point, but it also revealed the bazooka's fundamental limitations. The weapon worked best when operators could position themselves advantageously, particularly in urban environments where buildings provided concealment and elevation. The Tiger kill required extraordinary circumstances, exceptional skill, and remarkable luck. Most bazooka engagements would never enjoy such favourable conditions. German forces quickly adapted their tactics to counter the evolving bazooka threat. Tank crews began welding additional armour plates onto their vehicles, creating spaced armour that could defeat shape-charge rounds. They modified their operating procedures, invulnerable to avoid exposed areas unnecessarily. Most importantly, they accelerated development of their own superior anti-tank weapons based on captured American technology. The Panzerschreck entered German service in 1943 with capabilities that far exceeded the original American design. Each weapon cost 70 Reichsmarks to manufacture, and German factories would eventually produce over 300,000 units before the war's end. The weapon appeared in two variants, the original RPZ-B54 and the improved RPZ-B54/1, which featured a shortened tube and enhanced rocket that increased firing range to nearly 600 feet. German allies received Panzerschrecks through military aid programs that demonstrated the weapon's effectiveness across different theatres of operation. Finland employed the weapon with devastating success against Soviet armour during their continuation of the Winter War, where Finnish anti-tank teams earned reputations as skilled tank hunters. The Finnish military adopted the German name directly, calling their weapons Panssarikauhu, a literal translation of Panzerschreck. Italy's fascist Social Republic Hungary also received significant quantities of Panzerschrecks, which they used extensively during the war's final campaigns. Hungarian forces employed the weapon during Operation Spring Awakening, Germany's last major offensive on the Eastern Front, where Panzerschreck teams achieved remarkable success rates against Soviet armour. Italian units became legendary for their anti-tank hunting capabilities, stalking Allied tanks through the mountainous terrain of northern Italy with deadly effectiveness. The psychological warfare aspects of the Panzerschreck proved almost as important as its physical capabilities. Allied tank crews developed genuine fear of the weapon, knowing that any infantry position might conceal an anti-tank team capable of destroying their vehicle from considerable distance. This fear forced fundamental changes in Allied armoured tactics, requiring tanks to operate with extensive infantry support and limiting their ability to exploit breakthroughs independently. American forces responded to the German improvements with typical industrial determination. The success of the Panzerschreck had made clear that the original Bazooka design required complete redesign rather than incremental improvements. American ordnance engineers began developing what would become known as the Super Bazooka, incorporating lessons learned from both their own battlefield experience and captured German weapons. The M20 Super Bazooka featured a larger 3.5-inch rocket that could penetrate significantly more armour than its predecessor. Learning from the reliability problems that had plagued early bazookas, engineers packaged the new ammunition in moisture-resistant containers and developed comprehensive maintenance procedures for the launcher itself. The weapon's field manual contained extensive instructions on lubrication, cleaning and proper storage techniques that would prevent the malfunctions that had crippled the original design. Production of the M20 began in the final months of World War II, but the weapon would not see significant combat repeated in 1950. The arsenal until the Korean War, whose ability increased to rapidly production, proved crucial when American forces encountered Soviet-supplied T-34 tanks in Korea. Within 13 days of the war's beginning, the first shipment of Super Bazookas reached frontline units, and over the following year, factories produced over 700 additional weapons. Meanwhile, the original bazooka continued evolving through battlefield innovation that revealed American soldiers' remarkable adaptability. Major Charles Carpenter, a reconnaissance pilot flying unarmed observation aircraft over German-occupied France, grew frustrated with his vulnerability to enemy ground fire. His Piper L-4 Grasshopper served a critical mission spotting German troop movements for General George Patton's advancing armour, but the aircraft lacked any defensive armament. Carpenter's solution exemplified American ingenuity at its most creative. He bolted 6 M1 bazooka launchers onto his aircraft's wing struts, wiring their firing mechanisms to a trigger in his cockpit. The transformation converted his defenseless observation plane into an improvised tank-hunting aircraft that would earn him legendary status among both American and German forces. Flying his weaponized Grasshopper over German positions, Carpenter would swoop down on panzer columns and engage tanks with his bazookas at point-blank range. The psychological impact on German tank crews was profound. They found themselves under attack from an aircraft that should have been completely harmless, fired upon by weapons that were supposed to be limited to ground combat. The sheer audacity of the concept challenged every assumption about aerial warfare. Carpenter's tactics evolved through combat experience that pushed the boundaries of both aviation and anti-tank warfare. He would land at nearby airfields to reload his bazookas, then return to continue his attacks until German forces withdrew or were destroyed. On one memorable occasion, German tanks had pinned down American infantry in a creek bed, leaving the soldiers exposed and helpless. Carpenter arrived overhead and made multiple attack runs, firing 16 bazooka rounds and destroying 2 tanks while providing covering fire that allowed the OV infantry to escape. The success Bazooka Charlie attracted newspaper coverage that made him a celebrity throughout American forces. His exploits demonstrated how creative application of existing technology could multiply a weapon's effectiveness far beyond its original design parameters. The sight of bazookas mounted on aircraft wings represented everything dynamic about American military innovation during World War II. German intelligence services took note of Carpenter's activities with considerable interest. The concept of aircraft-mounted bazookas suggested new possibilities for close air support that could revolutionize ground attack operations. While German forces never developed their own equivalent system, they began taking additional precautions against low-flying aircraft that might be carrying improvised armament. Carpenter's official combat record credited him with destroying 6 German tanks during his unconventional career, including 2 of the feared Tiger I heavy tanks. His success rate exceeded that of many conventional anti-tank gun crews, proving that innovation and determination could overcome apparent technological limitations. The bazookas that had sod fail miserably in North Africa were now destroying Germany's most advanced armour when employed by a creative pilot willing to risk everything for tactical advantage. The evolution from failure to success illustrated broader patterns in wartime weapon development that would influence military technology for decades to come. The bazooka's journey from laughingstock to legend demonstrated how initial setbacks could be overcome through persistent improvement, proper training, and innovative application. The weapon that German tank crews had initially mocked was now forcing fundamental changes in their tactical operations and inspiring their own superior designs. By late 1944, the bazooka had achieved recognition as one of the war's most significant military innovations, earning inclusion in General Eisenhower's list of the 4 tools of victory that enabled Allied triumph. Alongside the atomic bomb, the Jeep, and the C-47 transport aircraft, the humble rocket launcher had earned its place among the technologies that defeated Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. Yet even as the original bazooka reached the peak of its effectiveness, its limitations were becoming increasingly apparent against evolved German armour protection systems. The weapon that had revolutionized infantry anti-tank warfare was already being superseded by its own success, as both sides in the conflict developed increasingly sophisticated weapons based on the fundamental principles it had established. The transformation was undeniable, but the numbers told a sobering story that revealed the bazooka's true battlefield reality. For every dramatic success like the Tiger kill at Biscari, there existed countless encounters where the weapon failed to live up to its revolutionary promise. American after-action reports from 1944 painted a complex picture of effectiveness that defied simple categorization. Single lucky shots sometimes destroyed heavily armoured targets, while sustained bazooka attacks on lighter vehicles occasionally produced negligible results. The weapon's performance varied so dramatically that frontline commanders struggled to predict its effectiveness in any given engagement. Some reports documented bazookas easily penetrating the thickest German armour, while others described multiple direct hits on relatively thin-skinned vehicles, producing minimal damage. The inconsistency frustrated American tactical planners who needed reliable weapons with predictable capabilities for their operational planning. Environmental factors played crucial roles in determining success or failure. Moisture infiltration could render the electrical firing system completely inoperable, leaving soldiers with useless tubes when they needed functioning weapons most desperately. Temperature extremes affected rocket performance in ways that manufacturers had never anticipated during peacetime development. Humid jungle conditions in the Pacific Theater proved particularly devastating to bazooka reliability, causing short circuits and misfires that left Marines and soldiers defenseless against Japanese armor. The weapon's back blast signature created tactical dilemmas that went far beyond simple safety concerns. The distinctive smoke trail and flame discharge immediately marked the shooter's position for enemy retaliation, forcing bazooka teams to fire and relocate with desperate urgency. German forces quickly learned to watch for these telltale signs and respond with devastating artillery or machine gun fire directed at suspected launch positions. Combat veterans developed sophisticated techniques for minimizing their exposure while maximizing the weapon's effectiveness. They learned to position themselves near natural cover that could mask their firing signature, to coordinate with supporting units that could provide suppressive fire during their vulnerable moments after shooting, and to select firing positions that offered multiple escape routes when rapid displacement became necessary for survival. The psychological burden of operating bazookas weighed heavily on the soldiers who carried them into combat. These men understood that their weapons made them high-priority targets for enemy forces seeking to eliminate anti-tank capabilities before launching armoured attacks. Bazooka gunners developed reputations as either heroes or casualties, with very few occupying the middle ground between those extremes. German tactical responses evolved rapidly as Wehrmacht commanders recognized the genuine threat posed by improved American bazookas. Tank crews began operating with increased infantry support, specifically tasked with identifying and eliminating bazooka teams before they could engage armored targets. German forces developed new communication to call protocols that allowed tanks for immediate suppressive fire against suspected rocket launcher positions. The Germans also modified their armour tactics to reduce vulnerability to bazooka attacks. Tank commanders learned to avoid predictable routes that might allow bazooka teams to establish ambush positions. They began using buildings and terrain features to mask their approach routes, denying American gunners the clear sight lines necessary for effective engagement. German tanks started operating in closer coordination with infantry forces that could clear potential bazooka positions before armour moved through contested areas. Meanwhile, German production lines were churning out Panzerschrecks at rates that demonstrated their recognition of the weapon's strategic importance. The manufacturing statistics revealed the priority German leadership placed on infantry anti-tank capabilities. Over 300,000 Panzerschrecks rolled off production lines between 1943 and 1945, representing a massive investment in a weapon concept that originated from captured American technology. The irony was not lost on American intelligence analysts who tracked German weapon production through various sources. The nation that had initially dismissed the bazooka as primitive junk was now mass-producing an improved version that posed serious threats to Allied armoured operations across Europe. German engineering had transformed American innovation into a weapon that exceeded the original design's capabilities in every meaningful metric. Combat testing revealed the Panzerschreck's devastating effectiveness against Allied armour. American tank crews operating in Europe began reporting encounters with German anti-tank teams, armed with weapons that could penetrate their vehicles from ranges previously considered safe. The psychological impact on Allied armoured forces was immediate and profound, forcing tactical changes that reduced the effectiveness of American tank operations. The Panzerschreck's larger warhead delivered significantly more destructive power than American bazookas could achieve. The 88mm rocket carried enough explosive material to not only penetrate armour, but also cause catastrophic secondary damage inside targeted vehicles. Tank crews who survived Panzerschreck hits often reported complete destruction of internal equipment and devastating casualties among crew members. The weapon that began as a comedian's musical prop had transformed the fundamental nature of ground warfare forever. From those first mocking laughs in the Tunisian desert to the terror-inducing Panzerschreck that would haunt Allied tank crews across Europe, the bazooka's journey embodied the chaotic evolution of military technology during humanity's greatest conflict. What started as desperate improvisation with scrap metal and shaped charges became the foundation for every infantry anti-tank weapon that followed. The Germans may have laughed first, but they learned fastest, turning American innovation into German superiority with characteristic engineering precision. Yet the true victory belonged not to any single nation, but to the revolutionary concept itself. For the first time in military history, individual soldiers possessed the power to destroy the mightiest machines of war with weapons they could carry on their shoulders. The age of the invincible tank was over before it had truly begun. Today, the legacy of that crude pipe and rocket combination lives on in every modern infantry anti-tank weapon, from the Soviet RPG to the American Javelin missile system. The fundamental principle established by those desperate engineers in 1942 remains unchanged. Give individual soldiers the power to destroy armoured vehicles, and the entire nature of ground warfare transforms forever. What began as mockery in the North African desert became the template for military technology that continues shaping battlefields 8 decades later. The Bazooka story reminds us that innovation often emerges from failure, that brilliant concepts can suffer disastrous initial implementations, and that military technology evolves through a complex interplay of creativity, desperation, and adaptation. The Germans who laughed at that primitive American contraption ultimately created their own superior version, proving that the best compliment to any innovation is imitation by your enemies. From Bob Burns's comedic musical instrument to the terror-inducing Panzerschreck, the Bazooka's journey represents more than just weapons development. It embodies the relentless human drive to level playing fields, to give the underdog a fighting chance, and to prove that sometimes the simplest ideas can change everything. The tank may have ruled the battlefield for a brief moment in military history, but the bazooka ensured that reign would never go unchallenged again.